Hello, everybody. Welcome. I hope you enjoyed your coffee and the turbulence that things here have been. So, as Sergey said, this lecture is about Node.js microservices. So, kind of the dark side, the back end of what you guys are doing. So, most of the people here are front-end developers, I think. So, who among the audience tried Node.js? Wow, nice. Who deployed a production application of Node.js to production? Okay, awesome. So, all of you are wondering what this train is doing here. So, imagine you're building an e-commerce application, a very big one with items availability, shipping, money, transactions, server-side, back-end side, mobile applications, something very big. And you have everything in one monolithic application. Now, think of one developer in your team that deployed a bug to production with a memory leak. The entire application will crash, and you will find yourself in this nice situation here. So I'm Adi. I'm leading a group in AOL. In this industry for the past 10 years, working on client-side technologies, server-side technologies, wrote in any language that you can think of. My true passion is JavaScript and front-end as a whole. What is this lecture is all about? So Node.js as a back-end language is very scalable, very extensible, and should be the first choice for every JavaScript developer. JavaScript is an amazing language, and all of you here knows how to write JavaScript, and it's very simple. Node.js come to you guys and say, take it to the next level and start to write back-end applications with it. Node.js is far from being scary, and you can use it as a first-class citizen of your production applications. And this is what we did, and part of this lecture is to show you and demonstrate how to do it properly with a good back-end architecture. So what is a microservice? It's a big hype. Everybody is talking about it. You probably heard it millions of times. So imagine, let's take the e-commerce application that you built. Imagine splitting it down to small pieces of services. Every service is very tiny and responsible for one domain. So if we take the e-commerce application, so you can think of taking the transactions, taking the availability, taking the API that people before me with the FQL and some graph languages showed. So to split it down to small bits, highly distributed in a lot of servers talking with one another. You can think about it as SOA reinvented. This is kind of the modern interpretation of SOA that we see today. What are the disadvantages of a monolithic application? Without looking at the train that I showed you as the first slide, but a monolithic application is something that most of us are used to. Okay, let's build it all, put it, it's working, great. When you're talking about scale, when you're talking about the challenges that the world today brings, it's kind of an item that we need to break free of. So first, you need a very strong hardware to be able to run a very big application of such. So imagine in an e-commerce application with all of that, you will get a very high load for every bit of that application, and you will pay a lot of money for it. If you want to scale it, then you need to pay whatever your server costs are, but a very significant amount of money. As I mentioned before, a bug in one of the pieces of your code can take down the entire application. It happened to very big companies. I won't name names and tell stories, but it happened to a lot of companies that brought them to focus on microservices and some new architecture. So what are the advantages of microservices, you ask yourself? So it's quite the opposite of the disadvantages of a monolithic app. So first, single, very small code base for every service, which it's very easy to scale because you have one service taking your transactions. You can scale it if it gets high load and use, I don't know, Amazon's auto-scaling or any provider that you like. The deployments are very contained. So if you have a bug in one of the services, you can just deploy that specific service without touching the entire application. It's very easy to maintain your tests because then you can write unit tests, you can write your specific service domain tests and connect it to a continuous delivery framework, and voila, you've got end-to-end deployment unit. The availability, so if, let's take the e-commerce example, if a service will go down that is only responsible for getting the availability of the products, so the application will stay alive. Your front end will still show you the e-commerce site, so you will have 0 left in the items. Yes, it's a big bug, but it's not the end of the world. Your application will still stay alive. And for us, JavaScript developer, it enables the right language for each domain. So what does it mean? It means that one microservice can be written in Node.js, while the other in Python, one in Java, one in .NET. I'm not saying this is the right approach and go and distribute your programming languages, but there are some languages that are doing better on certain materials. What are the challenges? As everything in the world, a new pattern will bring challenges with it. So first challenge is the communication. So you had one application that gets one call from the user, and you return the response. Now this application will get a call, and we'll need to propagate that call to dozens of microservices that will need to respond to it. Sometimes that call will need to pass information from microservice to another, so it can become challenging. Then there's the sync between them. This microservice needs to work only after that one finishes and such. Operational overhead, you can't just copy-paste your files to the server. You need to maintain a farm, so, and be more aware of the DevOps of the development. So you can deploy to multiple servers, and you need to maintain this big pictures that you're getting. Monitoring, so you can't just rely on the CPU usage of your server. You now need to use tools like Datadog, tools like PM2, if you're familiar with node monitoring, to monitor your entire stack of services. And you need to be familiar with backward and forward compatibility, not to break everything when you deploy your microservice, because if you change your API, it needs to be backward compatible so others won't break and you don't have the dependency between the services. Let's see some code. So I've been thinking, how can I show you guys what is a microservice without delving into huge applications and to the bits and bytes. So I took a very simple to-do application, wrote it in ES6, it's very nice. I added it to my GitHub repository so you can copy the links and download it into your computers and see it. The first repository takes a very monolithic app that holds the UI, that holds the API, and the entity access together. The UI, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, the API, some endpoint, RESTful endpoint that returns the to-do lists. And the entity access, I just used some mock that returns an array of to-do tasks. So let's jump and see how this looks. So this is the app. You can see that the main JavaScript code of that app is only 50 lines of code. That's the front end of the app. I might want to show you how it looks. Very simple. You get tasks. You can mark that you did it or not. If you look at the network of it, you can see that there is a call to your API. Here, see, to the same domain that the application lives on, and fetch some response of tasks. So this is a very, very simple task. It has one it has one initial JavaScript code that you can see that serves the static code, that serves the API, and that's about it. You can go to the API and see nothing fancy here. It goes to the to-dos, returns a to-dos object, which is here, some very slimmed down array of items. So very simple application. Now what I did is, let's stop the application so I can refresh and show you what the broken down version is. Now what I did is I broke it down into 3 applications. So what we have here is, one is your static service. Static service is returning the HTML, the JavaScript, the CSS, and can be served behind the CDN. So that's the first application. I used Express to serve those static files. Then there's the API service. What we've seen in the application before is built into the app with another endpoint. Here I took it and separated into another service. In real life, you will probably want to take this API service and put it into its own repository as its own deployment unit. And then what I did is basically the API service over here. Let's open it. You will see that it serves the to-dos as the other app, but it's calling another service under another URL to fetch the items. So in real life, this will probably go to another entity access-like service that will own the connections to the database. So the API doesn't know what database you're working on. It doesn't have any references to Mongoose or to some MySQL or anything. It's just doing a RESTful call to another service. So let's see how this works. Let's do run for the static application in the other repository. Okay. Let's hope that it will work because the internet here is not that good. It doesn't look that it's working. Okay. Let's start the entity access and let's do a refresh. And you will see that I got a breakpoint on my entity service application just before it returns the to-do. I'll stop here for those of you who haven't raised your hand with experience with Node, and I want you to see that it's very simple to debug Node as a backend service with IntelliJ. There are a lot of tools in the market that will enable you to debug Node.js. You can see everything that is happening in the stack on the call. You can just hover items, you can open them. So very cool. Same experience that you have with backend services today, you get with Node.js. So it's not some simple thing that somebody built. It's something that you can use today, and you have the tools to debug it. So I'll hit play here to stop my break from coming. And you see that the items returned. And what's happening behind the scene is that you have a UI application that is calling an API that's behind the scene calling another microservice to fetch information. Now, think about today's structure. You will probably, if you'll develop it in your work, then you'll be asked, okay, we need a mobile app to have the same. So when you do the split, you have the infrastructure to do it very easily, because now you can have a mobile app that's calling your API. So try to think outside of the box. I'm not saying it's maybe for a to-do app, that's not the thing to do, but try to think on your own use cases, and you will find use cases for breaking down items to microservices. Okay, let's touch about the use case that we had in our company, in AOL. We wanted to be able to play inline content on mobile devices. So I don't know how you're familiar with mobile devices and tablets today, but today you can't autoplay and you can't play inline on handheld devices. The way we see it, it breaks the user experience when it scrolls through an article and he needs to click and see a full screen video on his page. And we wanted to fix it. We wanted to get more ad views and get more video views playing on those devices. So we gave a lot of thought of how to do it. How to be able to break these restrictions. I encourage all of you to always think outside of your boundaries and think how I can break those restrictions. So we thought of a very naive solution for this problem. What we said is, let's take the video URL, send it to a backend service that will take this URL and will break it down to images. Something very naive, and we will also get an MP3 file for that, and we will have some JavaScript code that will run those images one after the other. Let's see how it works. We did it a few months ago. It's working on production. Since then, we evolved and we have other methods which are very cool. You're very welcome to come and talk to me afterwards. I can show you some nice VR stuff also. But let's focus on this specific use case. So we wanted to do that. Most of the player team consisted of JavaScript developers. So we said, okay, the use case is very native to those developers. I don't want to take someone else from another team that will build it in Java or in Python, or we have a JavaScript developers. Many in the company were afraid, what, Node.js in production, high scale? We said, let's give it a shot, let's see how it works. So we went this path, and we built it with a nice architecture that I'll show you in a second. And the result is very nice. Let me show you some demonstration of how it works on an iPhone simulator. So you see, you have here the video. It autoplays, but for that demo, I just click play, and you can see that it looks just like a regular video, and it's playing inside that page. So let's take Safari, let's open it, and we'll see that it looks just as it is on a mobile article. Playing inline, and the frame rate is very good. It's a video for everything for the user, and we know, and now you know, that it's playing images behind the scene. So that's the end product that we delivered. Some stats. We use Datadog to collect the stats. You can see that the CPU for the servers, over here there are two servers. You can see the purple and the bluish line. You can see that it's getting to a very high 40K hits. It gets to a few thousand hits every minute. So it's a nice application with nice load. It's not the highest load that we've seen, but it's good and it's working. We don't see errors in a high scale, and we really love this solution. And most of it is because of the architecture that we choose. Let's delve into the architecture of this product. So as I mentioned, we have a web player. So think of a custom JavaScript code that you have that goes to an API service or some service in the backend with a video URL. Now, if we wanted to do it in a monolithic app, everything would have been in this specific service. But that's not our case now. This box here, the sliced video provider, as we call it, is calling some storage service that's accessing our Mongo database, asking the database, do you have information on that video URL? I won't take you into the details, hashing and whatever that we did, but essentially it's calling the database to get info on that specific URL. If it has info, it will return it to the web player. If it's not, it will say, okay, it's a new video, I've listed it down, and that's it. And the web player will get, okay, it's a new video, switch to click to play. Now, the provider, if it gets a new video, is calling another service that we call a video slicer, and telling it, okay, this is the URL, go and slice that URL into images, get the MP3 out of it, do the magic that you're doing behind the scene. So the video slicer is doing it offline without interference. Once the video slicer finishes, it pings the storage access and tells it, okay, I finished, mark that video as finished. That's the item in S3. It uploads everything. So the storage access writes it in the MongoDB. Now that's an interesting thing that we did, because we wanted the provider to shield against multiple hits on the storage access and against the video slicer. So we added local cache. Again, we did it in few weeks of development, so we didn't want to go with a full-blown solution. We thought local cache will be enough. But then what happens is that the provider has a local cache of a new video. Someone needs to tell it to invalidate that cache. So if you think back on the challenges that I showed you, so sync is one of them. So we needed a way to pass information from the storage service to the sliced video storage. So we took a very known piece that you probably are familiar with, and if you're not, go and read some about Redis. It has many usages, but we used it as a publisher subscriber service. So essentially, the video storage access is sending a message to Redis saying video with the URL ABCD is now ready or has been changed. The provider is listening to messages coming from Redis on any video change, and it's invalidated in its cache. So now let's think of autoscaling. Maybe we have 50 providers. Those 50 providers are listening to a change in video and invalidating their local cache. So this is a nice method that we use to sync between the services that we have on production. So we use Redis. Now, this is a very small architecture that we deploy to production, and this architecture holds many, many cores. So the magic is not only the architecture, but the autoscaling that we had behind the scene. So the provider is autoscaling, the storage access is autoscaling, and the video slicer. But after we deployed it, it was very nice to see that you don't need that much services to run such high load. The system works very nice with few of the services there. And we found that the video slicer that we thought, wow, it's going to work very hard, it should have a lot of services and CPU consumption and everything. It's getting very few messages, and we need only one of it at every single moment. While the provider, which is exposed to the world, and the storage access are scaling on a daily basis, hourly, minutes, whatever. So that's the architecture that we deployed to production for inline playback on mobile. Since then, we changed some stuff and added some cool features. Come talk to me afterwards if you want to see some examples. So what did we learn in this 30 minutes? First, if you haven't tried Node.js, I encourage you to go and play with it. Very cool, very easy. Today, you've got so many libraries out there that will help you do anything you want in just minutes of your time. Node.js is a very legitimate solution for production applications. If your team leader or your CTO tells you, no, I'm afraid of using Node.js, you can send him to me. Really, it can hold a lot. Yes, it has flaws. Yes, memory leaks. You need to debug, like every other thing. But it can hold, and you can have a very high-scale application running on Node.js. And today, I'm hearing a lot of startups and a lot of developers jumping onto this Node.js boat, and it's going to be the language that will rule them all. Trust me. And microservices. So microservices is just one design pattern that I've lectured about here. Very cool, can be easily applied to a Node.js application, and take the repositories that I sent there, play with it. You can see that it's not such a big deal to put backend architectures into your backend code, Node.js code. Okay, what else? I've got a minute and a bit, so I'll just go in a breeze about some other stuff that I can't talk about because of the time. So service discovery. So one thing when you deploy a lot of microservices is that you need to know which services are they, where the communication between them. So service discovery, look it up in Google. You will see a lot of tools out there to help you out with it. Very, very good thing to add to your stack. Autoscaling, again, AWS gives like a free account for developers to try their system. Look at autoscaling. Look how they can scale services that you can benefit from, and think of how to change your mind into building services that can scale very easily. Especially if you're building a startup, don't create some small application that then if someone said, okay, and if I have 1,000 users, you'll say, oh, 50 is the most that it will hold. So think of how your application will scale. And front-end microservices, think about this whole architecture in the front end. Think about your Angular directives, your Angular application working with a single deployment of services that can talk with one another with an event pass or any other mean. So then if you have a big application, you can deploy one unit instead of deploying everything together. So another thought for you to think of. Continuous deployment. Once you deploy your app via Git pull on the server, and very nice, think of how you can connect it with continuous deployment. There are open source solutions out there, and you can use Heroku or whatever to connect to your GitHub, pull it, run tests, and deploy your service. Thank you.